What happens when you spritz your dough with some water before you bake it? This is what I want to find out today in this small experiment. I made exactly the same dough, and one I'm going to spritz and the other one not. Now, I've always been spritzing my dough for quite some time, but then some of you said, okay, Hendrik, you might want to test what actually happens when you spritz it or when you don't spritz it. I was intrigued because when you bake sourdough, there's always something new to learn. I'm curious to read, what are your expectations? What is going to happen? My expectations are that the one which I will be spritzing with water is gonna have a few blisters more on the crust, and that it might have some more oven spring because we have more steam inside of the Dutch oven. So let me show you. I'll first be doing a quick recap of how I did the dough. I also added chapters to this video so that you can skip ahead to the parts that interest you the most. I'm very excited about this experiment, and yeah, please enjoy. This is pretty much my default dough, except that I'm making a large batch now. This is gonna contain 4 doughs for 4 different experiments that I wanted to run. It's my overnight recipe, which I have not released yet, but I'm actually using it these days because I find it super easy. Hydration of this dough is around 75%. There's a little bit of whole wheat inside. I think it makes a really excellent dough. It's now evening time. I'm just gonna be stirring everything together. For an overnight dough, you wanna be adding a little bit more strength, very important, with that long period where you don't do any stretch and folds unless you get up and do something, but I'm actually kind of lazy, so I just want this to rest for 10 hours or so. Okay, truth be told, maybe 12 hours or 13 hours. That's how long I'm typically sleeping. But yeah, so a long time without touching it pretty much. Just gonna be stirring everything now, developing some dough strength. I have a full video on that. I don't want to go too much into detail, but yeah, that's what I'm doing. Now it's time to work this dough. Just like I always do, I will now be extracting a small sample from this dough, which I will be placing inside. And this makes everything so much easier because you know exactly when you're done with the fermentation. In this case, this dough is ready when the sample roughly doubled in size. Now this depends on your flour. If your flour has less protein, you should start at a 25% size increase. This flour has around 14% protein overall. Then work yourself up because you don't want to ferment for too long. Typically, if your bread is very, very flat or so, then it might have been a sign that you just simply bulk fermented for too long. So start with the 25% size increase, go to 50, 75%, and 100%. But in this case, I know I'm going to stop at around 75 to 100% size increase. Also, we have to be careful. We have to make sure that the water, in this case I did, the water of this dough should be the same temperature as your room temperature, or else this sample might warm up or cool down faster than your actual dough. And then just a few degrees Celsius and change, or a few degrees Fahrenheit and change, and your sample is either going to be faster or slower than the main dough, and then this sort of loses its purpose. So yeah. Dough should be the same temperature as room temperature, very important. Just going to be extracting a small piece, and that I will be placing right inside. I have those new jars which visualize everything and a little bit easier, but it's also harder to place the dough inside. So what I like to do these days, just put a little bit of water in there, shake it, and then just wait for a few minutes. I'm also going to be rounding up this dough now, and then I'll be placing it in my main bulk fermentation container. I'm using my dough scraper because I don't want to lose any dough on the surface. Stingy German, you know? So look at this, 45-degree angle. I'm pushing into the dough and I'm pulling the dough. Note how my thumbs stay here. The dough doesn't rotate. The dough simply moves here. It's being dragged on top of itself. And this only works because we did not flour the surface. You can do the same thing with your hands. And look at this nice dough here. 75% hydration. I created a lot of dough strength. Very, very good looking dough. This is sort of the consistency that you want. And now with one movement, placing it in my bulk fermentation container. So this is a quite big container. What you can also do is you can just mark the container here instead of using the sample. That's going to be more reliable. But at the same time, if you now see this dough, it's not here everywhere in the edges. So everything has its pros and cons, I guess. This one would be more reliable in case the temperature changes. This one I find a little bit more comfortable because here it's also very hard to stretch and fold inside of a container like this. But I gotta use this because we have a lot of dough. I'm readying myself for bed, and then I'm gonna be doing one more stretch and fold on this one. And then it will sit overnight in this container, lid covered. We don't want the dough to dry out. Sample has been extracted and I just marked it. This is the time, it's around midnight now. This is where I want the dough to grow to. I'll just be placing both as close together as possible. Before going to bed, I just want to be applying one more stretch and fold in this container. And you already can see the reason why I don't like a container like this too much. It's just very hard to stretch and fold. And this is just going to give your dough so much more strength. In general, the less you need at the start, the more you should be doing those stretch and folds, simply to create additional dough strength. The more you need at the start, the less you also have to stretch and fold. So if you're lazy on the kneading, you don't have that much time, then you can definitely just knead for a shorter period of time and do more stretch and folds. Or you go less in water amount, then you also don't have to knead as much. Great. Good night, my dough. See you tomorrow morning. Good morning. It has been around 8 hours. And look at this. I would say the size increase is more or less the same on the container as it is in the small sample. So this is a good sign. Both methods seem to work. I'm now going to be adding some more dough strength to this dough. It definitely needs that. So yeah, let's do a nice stretch and fold. All right, with wetted hands, I'm just carefully removing the dough from the container. And then let's go. And here we go. Dough has been stretched and folded. I think we're gonna need another 2 to 3 hours probably. I'm gonna be doing one more test with my pH meter. So we are now at a pH of 4.10. That's interesting. I would have guessed that the pH was even lower based on the size increase. So I have to be a little bit careful now. Based on my own experience, if I go below 4 as pH, then I run into issues of over fermentation. Let me just take the sample again in another area of the dough. Okay, so yeah, it's the same. Okay, we have to be careful. I'm gonna be testing again in around an hour just to see. I don't want to go below 4 or else my dough starts to over ferment. I still need to do some additional research on this and test, but I think that this thing here, using the pH to do the bulk fermentation for your dough, definitely could lead to some very, very interesting insights in the future. Especially, you would no longer need a sample jar. I think this is just much more reliable than watching for size increase or so, because there's so many factors that can influence this. Interesting. So it's not the same everywhere in the dough. So if I took the sample in different places, and yeah, in some areas it's lower, in others it's higher. That's also where the stretch and folds are nice, because we are just evening out our dough a little bit. Just, yeah, in case we didn't mix enough, we're spreading some more of that starter around pretty much. From the last experiment I learned, don't trust your oven. So I like to use a thermometer now to make sure that my oven is exactly the temperature that I want. I will be baking them at 230 degrees for the first 25 minutes. And then afterwards, I will be removing the lid of my Dutch oven, and this allows the bread to really develop that crust. You want your bread to have many different colors because each different color is going to give you some additional amazing flavor. Ah, and it's coming out beautifully. Perfect. By the way, you might have noticed that I stopped using rice flour. I just like to rub my bread with some, or my dough. I like to rub my dough with some flour before I place it in the Banneton. I feel that way you don't get so many of those white spots. I like that a little bit more these days. So I'm just gonna give this a good score again, like that. And no pattern for now, just to make sure we don't do anything wrong. And the spritz. I'm expecting a lot of blisters. Oh, this is kind of hot. Let's see. And some more spritzes. The reason why I'm doing that is I expect this to create a lot of steam, and this steam is trapped inside of the Dutch oven. That's actually the main reason why you want to use a Dutch oven. It just simplifies everything. You have all that steam inside right now, and this humid environment allows your bread to really rise upwards, not forming a crust that quickly. That's why Dutch ovens work so excellent in the home ovens. Baking time, as I said before, 25 minutes at 230 degrees Celsius. Bread number one coming out. And this was my control group, and I simply wasn't satisfied with it enough. Now, I think where this went sideways. I have been shopping on that day, and I placed a lot of new stuff in my fridge, including some vegetables, some drinks, and other stuff. So I thought, okay, this might have been the temperature. And then I did another test. I measured the temperature, and the core temperature of the loaf was still at around 9 degrees Celsius. So by fiddling around with the fridge, it seems that my bread simply has proofed for too long. And you then get a somewhat flat bread, and also say goodbye to blisters. Your gluten can't hold the gas anymore. This is one of the reasons why I personally don't like to proof inside of the fridge these days that much anymore. Especially since I don't have a dedicated sourdough fridge. If I had a big one, sure, I could set the temperature and just forget about it. But as a hobby baker, you likely have to share your fridge for your daily products as well. That's where just proofing at room temperature, waiting for the finger poke test to pass, maybe freezing your dough for a little bit and then baking it is so much more reliable. Anyways, I stopped the experiment and I finished all the other doughs. So I just baked them pretty much half time, put them into a plastic bag, and then gave them to my neighbors. They could store them in the fridge and bake them whenever they want. This is definitely a pretty cool hack that I like to use these days. Makes it very easy, for instance, when you want to get really nice bread for your breakfast. Just bake it the evening before and then finish the bake until you have that nice colors everywhere on your bread. All the different colors are just adding so much incredible flavor. But yeah, I had to repeat this experiment one more time because I wanted to show you what actually happens. Oh well, and the day couldn't get any better. This is not footage from a crime scene, this is actually my kitchen. I was fermenting some tea, kombucha. I forgot to open one of the bottles to just release some gas from the bottle. And well, it bursted with a big explosion. Luckily, nobody was hurt. I just had to clean the kitchen. It was a complete mess. If there's no failure, then you're not innovating enough. Anyways, back to the dough. Oh well, I just had to repeat everything one more time, and I think this time I made sure that my fridge kept the proper temperature all the time. And yes, the pH is now higher and the internal temperature is also lower compared to yesterday, just because I didn't work with the fridge as much today. So yeah, definitely lesson learned. If you move in a lot of stuff in your fridge, you might want to put it on a colder setting. This one really cooled down nicely, whereas the one from yesterday simply didn't, because I was in a shopping frenzy mode and I just loaded my fridge with all sorts of random stuff. So much better, and I'm hoping now that I can finally show you my results. So let's bake this one and have a look. I'm super excited to show you. quick incision here. I'm gonna be scoring it at the center just because I feel like. Looking great. Quick correction cut, and now I'm gonna be spritzing the left hand side, and the right hand side I will be brushing with water, because that's something one of you pointed out. So yeah, please, thank you so much. Whenever you have a thought, another idea for an experiment, please drop a message, drop a comment. That's totally appreciated, because this way I also learn something new all the time. So left hand side spritz and right hand side the brush. And now into the oven, and I'm excited to see what happens. Left hand side is what I normally do, right hand side the brush I never do. Yeah, let's see what happens. And another spritz inside. Upper bottom heat without the fan and 230 degrees Celsius. 25 minutes passed, let's see what's hiding inside of the Dutch oven. Look at this beauty. This one turned out perfect. I don't see that much of a difference, but we're gonna finish baking this for another 15 minutes inside of the oven. Whew. I was a little scared based on the disaster before, but this one is exactly the style of bread that I wanted to bake, and I'm super positive about the other doughs as well. Time to bake the second bread, and the first one turned out amazing. I'm gonna be showing you in a bit. And for this one, I will be doing everything exactly the same, except that there's not gonna be any spritzing of water. And that's about it. I'm gonna cover this, and then it's gonna bake for the same time. And what do you think? Who is going to win? I'm very excited. I haven't baked like this in a long time. 25 minutes passed. Let's have a look at what's hiding inside. Oh, look at that. Another beautiful loaf. And look at those two beauties. Both of them turned out excellent. However, there is one clear winner in my opinion. Check this out. The left hand side really has an amazing ear, and even on both sides pretty much. That's the scoring in the center. And the right hand one, it's a little bit taller, but what you can see here is that the crust formed very quickly. The bread tried to rise here, but yeah, the crust was there and the bread could no longer rise. Overall, this one is just a little bit taller than the other one. And I think that can be explained in a way that this one formed the crust everywhere relatively quickly. This was the only weak spot still left. And that's why it also didn't spread out as much inside of the Dutch oven. It rose more vertically. But then at some point the growth was hindered by the crust being formed. From a visual perspective, I like the one which we baked with steam way more. Just look at how this opened up, and you have so many different colors, and every color is gonna give you amazing additional flavor. Here it didn't open up quite as much. There's less color. And also check out the bread from this side here. Again, the one which we baked with spritzing. And here the one without. You can just see that there was so much more steam. We have so many more blisters. Interesting, right? The one without steam is also beautiful. Please don't get me wrong. But what you can also see is how the bread just here, it's not even fully flat. It really tried to grow upwards inside of the Dutch oven. And this one here did not. I noticed that as well, because this one was almost a little bit stuck to the Dutch oven. This one was not. You can see that even better here a little bit on this side. Just compare how the sides look a little bit different. This one here just is a little bit more round, trying to grow upwards pretty much. So yeah, this steam one is looking great, but I would say this one is just looking a little bit better. And let's now have a look at the blister technique. This side here I spritzed, and the other side I brushed. Do you see the difference? I don't. I would say it's somewhat similar. Here we get some super blisters, for instance. I mean, if you want them, of course. And here as well. So in terms of blisters, I can't see a major difference. Maybe there's a tiny difference, but I wouldn't be able to say, yeah, that's it. So brushing versus spritzing, I don't think it makes a major difference. But generally speaking, in terms of oven spring and beauty of the loaf, steam inside of the Dutch oven seems to make a major difference. Well, not a major, a small but important difference. And those tiny parameters that you change and tweak, that just turn your bread from good to extraordinary. Beautiful crumb. And also a beautiful crumb. And here we go with our crumb comparison. Left hand side, again, the one with the spritz, so the one which I think had a little bit more steam, and the right hand side without. I would say this crumb here, especially towards the top, you will see that overall those tiny pockets here are a little bit more open, I think. Here they aren't as much, and to me that's always typically a sign that there was just not enough steam. They proofed exactly the same amount of time. The proofing was done inside of the fridge, so that shouldn't have been a major difference. Actually, this one here on the right hand side proofed even a little bit longer. But still, crumb wise, it's always really hard to judge, because it might also have been that I just pre-shaped this for maybe a second longer, and that can already have a dramatic impact. I would say both crumbs are very, very good. I'm happy with them. I would give this one a 4 out of 5. And this one probably a 5 out of 5. Conclusion. I think spritzing definitely won in terms of exterior. The bread on the outside was just way better. I also think that it had a little bit more of that oven spring that I want. It just opened up a little bit better. So I'm gonna keep doing what I'm doing. But there's a challenger, and the challenger is an ice cube. In the next experiment, I'm going to be using the other two doughs which I made in the same batch, and I'm gonna be testing who is the winner, spritzing versus an ice cube inside of the Dutch oven, and I'm very excited about this experiment as well. Let's see who is going to be the ultimate winner. I'm gonna be storing my breads like this now, and then I'll make my neighbors a nice surprise for breakfast. I hope you enjoyed watching this video and that you learned something new. As always, may the gluten be with you.